The banquet hall shimmered under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, each drop of glass scattering golden light across the polished wooden floor. The clatter of silverware, the swell of laughter, and the clink of raised glasses blended into a single symphony of festivity. Tonight was Richard Caldwell's night, his 55th birthday, and if the crowd was to be believed, a celebration of a life well lived. Richard stood near the head table, a wide grin stretched across his face. His salt and pepper hair caught the light as he leaned into embraces and handshakes from old colleagues and lifelong friends. A successful career in finance, a family that looked picture perfect, and a wife who had meticulously organized this grand evening. He was the man of the hour, or so it appeared. Eleanor Caldwell moved gracefully through the room, her navy blue dress hugging her figure with understated elegance. At 52, she carried herself with the kind of poise that drew respect without needing to demand it. She exchanged pleasantries, refilled glasses, and directed waiters with a calm authority. Yet beneath her measured smile lingered a weight, something no one else seemed to notice, though it softened her eyes in a way only the most observant might catch. "Richard, you old devil!" boomed Charles, one of his college friends, slapping him on the back. 55 and not a day over 40. What's the secret?" Richard laughed, raising his glass. "Clean living and Eleanor's cooking. What else?" The men around him chuckled, nodding toward Eleanor across the room. She responded with a polite smile, lifting her glass in acknowledgement, though the curve of her lips didn't quite reach her eyes. At the far end of the hall, their daughter Anna adjusted the microphone on the small stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she called out, "if I can have your attention." The crowd hushed, turning toward her. Anna, in her late 20s, wore the same determined expression as her mother, though softened by youth. "We're here to celebrate a man who has worked tirelessly, cared deeply, and been a constant source of strength for our family. Dad, this one's for you." Polite applause swelled as Richard took a theatrical bow. He mouthed, "Thank you," to Anna before she waved him forward. "Say a few words, Dad." Richard stepped onto the stage, basking in the admiration. "Well," he began, 55 years, and I finally feel like I'm getting the hang of it." Laughter rippled through the room. He straightened his tie, adopting a playful seriousness. "I won't bore you with long speeches tonight. I just want to say that none of this, none of me, would be possible without Eleanor." He gestured toward her, his voice swelling with performative sincerity. "She's the heart of this family, the reason I stand here today. Eleanor, I love you." The audience erupted into applause. Eleanor lifted her glass once more, her expression fixed and poised. "To Richard," she said softly. A few guests near her echoed the toast, oblivious to the faint tremor in her hand. Waiters began circulating with trays of champagne. Guests mingled, swapping stories of Richard's professional achievements, his golfing exploits, his charity donations. To them, he was a man of respect, stability, and charm. Yet Eleanor, watching from the edge of the crowd, knew the polished veneer was only half the truth. She had spent weeks preparing this celebration, every detail perfected. But tonight she carried an intention Richard hadn't anticipated, and though no one yet sensed it, the room was a stage awaiting its unmasking. Richard laughed heartily at an old joke from his colleague Daniel. His shoulders relaxed, his voice booming above the crowd. "Retirement? Not for me, not yet. I've still got plenty to prove." His confidence radiated, as though the world were firmly under his command. Eleanor approached him then, her smile sharp enough to draw admiration, but calm enough to betray nothing. "Richard," she said smoothly, touching his arm, "the mayor is here. He'd like to speak with you." Richard's eyes gleamed with pride. Of course, of course." He excused himself from the group, striding toward the waiting official. As he moved away, Eleanor remained behind, her hand lingering in the air before falling back to her side. She inhaled slowly, her chest tightening against the weight of the secret she had carried for weeks. Every laugh Richard gave, every compliment he received, fueled her resolve. This night would not unfold the way he imagined. For now the room swayed with joy. Guests clapped along as the band began playing a familiar tune. Glasses clinked again. Couples swayed on the dance floor. But beneath the golden glow and the polished facade, tension sat quietly in the corners, silent, waiting like a storm building just beyond the horizon. The music swelled as waiters wove between tables, carrying platters of seared salmon and roasted lamb. Candles flickered against the mirrored centerpieces. their flames bending in drafts of air from the restless crowd. To anyone looking in, the evening was seamless, an elegant tribute to Richard's accomplishments. But beneath the polish, subtle cracks had begun to show. Richard sat at the head table, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. His laughter carried across the hall, punctuating stories told by his colleagues. Yet his hand never strayed far from his phone, face down beside his glass. Every few minutes he slid it toward him, brushing a finger over the black screen, as though willing it to light up. Eleanor noticed. She always noticed. From her seat just across from him, she caught the flick of his eyes whenever he thought no one was watching. For weeks she had charted those glances, memorized the timing of the buzzes that drew him away, noted the excuses he gave for late-night calls. Tonight his movements were no different. Careless, habitual, a man too sure of his own illusion. "Dad," Anna's voice broke the rhythm of his laughter. "Remember when you took us camping that summer? You spent half the night trying to set up the tent backward." The table chuckled, recalling a rare moment of Richard as fallible. Richard smirked, raising his glass. "Some stories never die, do they?" He took a long sip of wine, though his gaze darted again toward the silent phone. Eleanor lifted her fork, but her appetite had long since vanished. Instead, she studied her husband's face, the practiced smile, the furrows smoothed by charm, the flicker of nerves that only she could read. She wondered if anyone else saw the performance for what it was. Likely not. Richard had always been adept at dazzling crowds, dressing truth in charisma. At the next table, Charles leaned toward Eleanor. "You must be proud," he said warmly. "Richard's built a legacy not many can match." Eleanor's lips curved politely. "Yes, he has." Her voice was even, though a shadow crossed her expression for an instant before she caught herself. The microphone squealed, cutting off further conversation. Daniel, one of Richard's longtime associates, raised his glass from the stage. "To Richard Caldwell, the man who taught us all that success isn't just numbers, but character." "Character," Eleanor repeated under her breath, soft enough that no one else could hear. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Richard stood to accept the toast, beaming as though Daniel's words were carved in stone. He placed a hand dramatically over his chest. "Thank you, my friend. If there's one thing I've tried to embody, it's integrity." The word hung in the air, heavy and ironic. Eleanor's jaw stiffened, though she masked it with a smile. Inside, her resolve sharpened. She had chosen tonight not by accident, but by design. To expose duplicity in a moment built for admiration would pierce deeper than any private confrontation ever could. Still, timing mattered. The storm could not break too early. Richard returned to his seat, sliding his phone into his pocket with a casualness that failed to disguise his unease. Eleanor had seen the faint glow of a new notification before he slipped it away. She knew what it contained. She had already seen enough to know every detail, the words, the promises, the images that didn't belong to her. Across the table, Anna and her brother David bickered playfully over whose toast had been funnier. Their laughter rang genuine, untouched by suspicion. Eleanor's heart clenched at the thought of them learning the truth. Yet she reminded herself shielding them from pain had only allowed Richard's lies to grow unchecked. Tonight she would not shield anyone, not even herself. "Eleanor," a guest to her right leaned in. "You look radiant. This must be such a proud evening for you." Eleanor turned, her smile perfectly polite. "Yes," she replied. "It is certainly memorable." Richard caught her eyes then, his grin faltering for the briefest moment. There was something in her tone, some quiet steel that brushed against his certainty. He looked away quickly, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Dinner continued, though the food seemed tasteless to Eleanor. Conversation floated above her, laughter and music blending into a haze. She rehearsed silently in her mind. Not the speech she would give, and that was already etched deep, but the courage it required to speak it aloud. She glanced again at Richard, whose phone lit faintly under the tablecloth, unseen by most. His thumb moved quickly, his lips tugging at the corner in a half-smile he thought invisible. And in that moment, Eleanor knew. The mask he wore was nearly complete, but she held the final piece. The evening's illusion stretched, flawless to nearly everyone. Yet beneath its polished surface, tension pooled unseen, waiting for the moment when the tide would turn and the celebration would curdle into something far darker. By the time dessert was served, the air had turned syrup thick with warmth and laughter. The band played something jazzy and forgettable, a sound meant to fill the room but not disturb it. A waiter poured champagne into crystal flutes, the bubbles racing upward like they couldn't wait to escape. Eleanor watched the glasses fill, one after another, until her own hand lifted, steady as stone. Across the table, Richard was in full command of his audience. A small circle had gathered. Old friends, new admirers, people drawn to his gravity. His charm was on autopilot, that easy rhythm of flattery and modesty he wore like a suit. He didn't notice Eleanor slip away from the table. She moved quietly through the room, her dress whispering against the carpet. Her heart wasn't racing. It was steady, mechanical, like it had rehearsed this rhythm for weeks. Near the stage stood the microphone, simple, silver, waiting. She brushed her fingers against it once, testing the weight. "Mrs. Caldwell," said one of the servers, startled by her sudden presence. "Would you like me to—" She smiled faintly. "No, thank you. I'll take it from here." The music faded as she stepped up onto the small stage. The crowd turned almost instantly, the way people do when the energy in a room shifts without warning. Richard's laughter trailed off mid-sentence. He looked up, puzzled. Eleanor took the microphone in both hands. Her voice, when it came, was smooth. "I know we've had some lovely speeches tonight," she began, her eyes sweeping the hall. "And I'd like to say a few words of my own. After all, I'm the one who knows Richard best." Soft laughter rippled through the room. Someone clapped politely. She smiled, warm, composed. "We've been married 30 years. 30 years of dinners and business trips, late nights, and the kind of quiet understanding only time can build. I thought tonight should be a celebration of honesty too." The room stilled, laughter evaporating. Richard straightened in his chair. "Eleanor," he called softly, his voice a warning disguised as tenderness. "This isn't necessary." She ignored him. "I spent weeks planning this night," she continued. "Every flower, every song. I wanted it perfect, and for a while I convinced myself it was. But perfection," she paused, her gaze locking on him, "has a way of cracking when truth leaks through." A murmur spread among the guests. Richard's colleagues exchanged glances. Eleanor reached into her clutch and unfolded a single piece of paper, creased from being held too tightly for too long. "These," she said quietly, "are messages I wasn't meant to see." Richard's face drained of color. "Eleanor," he hissed, standing now. "Stop this, please." She read aloud. Her voice didn't tremble. "You looked incredible tonight. I can still taste the wine on your lips." A gasp rippled across the room. Richard's colleague Daniel half rose from his seat. "Eleanor, maybe—" She cut him off with a glance sharp enough to silence him. "I can't wait until your next trip, R. Maybe this time you'll stay the night." The murmurs turned into whispers, an undercurrent of disbelief. Someone's fork clattered against porcelain. Richard took a step forward, his voice rising. "Enough. You've made your point. This isn't the place." Her eyes met his, steady, unflinching. "It's exactly the place," she said. "You built this life on appearances, on control. I'm simply returning the favor." The paper trembled in her hand, not from fear but release. She let it fall to the floor, fluttering like something dead. From the back, a voice whispered too loudly, "Who's she talking about?" Eleanor answered without hesitation. "Her name is Lydia Hale," she said. "She works in his office." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard's shoulders slumped, the fight leaving him like air from a punctured tire. He didn't look at anyone. Eleanor lowered the microphone slightly, her tone softening but not retreating. "I believed in you," she said, "through the long nights, through every half-truth. I told myself marriage meant forgiveness. But tonight, I choose truth over image. That's my gift to you, Richard." He spoke barely above a whisper. "Please, Eleanor, not like this." Her reply was measured. "There is no gentle way to end deceit." She set the microphone back on its stand, the feedback humming for a moment before dying away. The room seemed to exhale as she stepped down from the stage, moving past the stunned faces, past the tables lined with untouched desserts. No one stopped her. Even the music dared not start again. Richard stood alone, every eye on him, his empire of respect collapsing silently under the weight. of exposure. The celebration had turned irrevocably into reckoning. For a long moment, no one moved. The sound system still hummed softly, the only sign the world hadn't stopped entirely. A fork dropped somewhere near the back of the hall. Then the quiet scattered, like glass underfoot, as voices began to rise, uneasy and low. Guests shifted in their seats, caught between disbelief and fascination. Richard stood in the center of it all, pale and frozen, as if he'd been struck by some invisible hand. The paper Eleanor had read from still lay at his feet, its edges curling slightly from the draft of the air conditioner. It might as well have been a corpse. "Is this real?" someone whispered. "Surely not," another replied. But the tone said they already knew. Eleanor had stepped off the stage and vanished toward the exit moments earlier. The doors at the far end of the hall swung gently in her wake. Richard's eyes followed them like a man watching a ship sail away without him. Anna was the first to move. "Dad," she said softly, her voice a tremor. "Tell me it's not true." He turned to her, his mouth working soundlessly before words stumbled out. "Sweetheart, this isn't—" She misunderstood. "It's God, it's complicated." David stood beside his sister, taller, jaw tight. "Complicated?" "She read the messages, Dad." His voice was low, furious. "You humiliated Mom in front of everyone. Or did she just finally beat you to it?" Richard reached out a hand, but David stepped back. The gesture hung in the air, heavy and useless. Around them, whispers had swelled into soft chatter, like wind through dry leaves. Charles, the college friend, approached cautiously. "Richard," he murmured, "maybe you should address this before it gets worse." Richard let out a bitter laugh. "Address this? In front of 200 people? What would you have me say, Charles?" He looked around, his voice sharp now, cutting through the murmurs. "That my wife decided to destroy my life in public? That's what you want?" The crowd quieted again. A few of his colleagues avoided his gaze entirely, fiddling with their napkins. Others simply stared, waiting to see if the scene would continue. People love a tragedy when it's not their own. At the bar, Daniel whispered something to the mayor, and the two quietly made for the exit. They didn't look back. Eleanor's absence filled the room like a ghost. Her name moved through the guest whispers, half admiration, half discomfort. Richard raked a hand through his hair, his face flushed now, anger beginning to replace shame. "She could have spoken to me privately. She didn't have to turn this into a circus." Anna's voice rose. "You did that the moment you lied to her." He turned to her, chest heaving. "You don't understand marriage, Anna. It's not black and white. Neither is betrayal." She shot back, tears brimming. The silence after that felt colder than the first. A small group of guests began slipping out, murmuring apologies they didn't mean. The ones who stayed pretended not to stare. The musicians, unsure what to do, packed up their instruments slowly, as if afraid to make noise. Richard's assistant, a young woman named Emily, hovered at the edge of the crowd, pale and stiff. She had seen Lydia Hale's name before, in office gossip and whispers by the coffee machine. Her eyes met Richard's for half a second, and he looked away first. David finally broke the stillness, muttering, "I'm driving Anna home." "Wait," Richard said, but his son was already moving. "David." He didn't turn. When the doors closed behind his children, the echo seemed to strip what little life was left in the hall. Now only a handful remained. Old friends, business partners, and the staff, standing awkwardly near the buffet, waiting for orders that wouldn't come. Richard poured himself a drink. The glass trembled slightly in his hand. "She planned this," he muttered, almost to himself. "Down to the damn lighting." Charles approached again, his tone gentler this time. "You should go home, Richard. Talk to her. Make this right if you can." Richard stared into the amber liquid. "You think there's a right after that?" He drained the glass and set it down hard enough to crack the rim. No, she wanted a spectacle. She got it. As the last guest slipped out, the room felt cavernous, an emptied theater after the play had gone wrong. The decorations still glowed, the candles still burned, but none of it meant anything now. Richard sat back down at his table, elbows on his knees, his phone glowing softly beside him. A message blinked across the screen. From Lydia. "I just saw the video. I'm so sorry." He stared at it, then locked the phone without replying. The quiet pressed in, heavier than any applause could have been. The celebration was over. All that remained was the echo of what it had pretended to be. The drive home was silent. The road stretched in long, wet ribbons, the kind that made headlights look like they were melting. Richard kept one hand on the wheel, the other pressed against his temple. His reflection flickered in the windshield. 55 years of control, undone in a single evening. When he pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. Eleanor's car was there, but no light glowed behind the curtains. He sat for a moment in the driver's seat, engine idling, fingers drumming against the steering wheel. The laughter from the party still echoed in his skull, warped now into something brittle and mocking. Inside, the air smelled faintly of perfume and dust. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. He tossed his keys onto the counter, the metallic clatter breaking the stillness. On the dining table, a single champagne glass sat half full. His, maybe, or hers. He couldn't tell anymore. "Eleanor," he called, voice low. Nothing answered. He moved through the rooms, living room, study, kitchen. Everything was in place, perfectly arranged, untouched. The kind of order that felt like accusation. He found her finally in the den, sitting by the cold fireplace, still in the same navy blue dress, her hair undone. The paper she'd read from lay on the table beside her, now torn into careful, deliberate halves. "You shouldn't have come home tonight," she said without looking up. He stood in the doorway, unsure whether to move closer or retreat. "Where else was I supposed to go?" Her voice was flat. "Anywhere but here." He exhaled, rubbing a hand across his face. "You humiliated me, Eleanor." That made her look up. Her eyes were calm, but there was something fierce beneath. "No, Richard. You humiliated yourself. I just stopped cleaning up after it." He flinched. "You could have talked to me." "I did," she cut in. "You just stopped listening years ago." He sank into the armchair across from her, the leather creaking beneath his weight. For the first time in years, the house felt foreign to him, like he was visiting a life that had once belonged to someone else. "I made mistakes," he said finally. "I know that. Mistakes are leaving dishes in the sink," she replied. "You built an entire second life." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "It wasn't love, Eleanor. It was convenient," she offered. "A distraction," he finished, his voice cracking slightly. "You think I don't hate myself for it?" She gave a small, humorless laugh. "No, I think you hate that I found out." He didn't respond. The truth sat heavy between them, breathing quietly. After a while, she stood and crossed to the window, staring out into the night. "Do you know what it's like to build your world around someone who's already left it? To smile through dinners, nod through lies, host parties where everyone praises the man they think you are?" He looked down. "I never meant for it to matter," she said softly. "It mattered the moment you chose to hide it." He stared at her back, silhouetted against the glass. "You could have destroyed me privately. Why do it there like that?" "Because you only understand things when an audience is watching," she said, turning to face him. "I needed you to feel small, Richard. Just once. The way you made me feel for years." He swallowed hard. "So that was justice?" "No," she said. "It was honesty." They stood in silence again. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Outside, rain began tapping against the windows, gentle but relentless. Richard rose slowly, moving toward the mantel where their family photos stood. Weddings, vacations, birthdays. His fingers brushed across the frame of one photo. Him and Eleanor, years younger, smiling under a bright sky. He couldn't remember the last time that smile had been real. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said quietly. I wanted to feel alive again." She studied him for a long moment. "You think betrayal is proof of life?" He shook his head, unable to find words. Eleanor exhaled, her tone softening, not with forgiveness, but fatigue. "You've always been good at convincing people, Richard. Even yourself. But tonight, everyone finally saw what I've known for years." He met her gaze. "And what's that?" "That you don't know who you are without someone else believing in you." The words landed like a blow. He felt them echo through the hollow inside him, the part he'd been patching with success, attention, and charm. "I can fix this," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, Richard. You can't fix something you never intended to keep." The fire never started that night. She left him there in the den, the echo of rain replacing the applause that used to follow him everywhere. For the first time in his life, Richard Caldwell sat in silence. No audience, no mask, no performance. Just a man watching his reflection fade in the darkened glass, realizing that the thing he'd lost wasn't his reputation. It was the version of himself that still believed he deserved to be loved. Morning crept into the house quietly, as if afraid to disturb what had broken overnight. Pale light bled through the curtains, turning the living room into a soft gray stage of aftermath. The champagne glass still sat on the dining table. The torn paper was gone. So was Eleanor. Richard found her in the garden, standing among the damp rose bushes, with her coat draped loosely around her shoulders. The air smelled of wet earth and something faintly metallic. Rain and endings often shared the same scent. She didn't turn when he stepped outside. "You didn't sleep," he said. "Neither did you." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was just true. He took a few steps closer, the grass squelching under his shoes. "We need to talk." Eleanor's gaze stayed on the horizon, pale light catching in her hair. "We talked last night," she said. "You just didn't like the version where I had a voice." Richard exhaled, shoulders heavy. "You made a spectacle out of both of us." "I made a point," she corrected. "You built a life that only worked as long as I played the part. I stepped off your stage and suddenly it's a scandal." He didn't answer. The word stage lingered between them, sharper for its accuracy. After a pause, she said, "Anna called me this morning. She's with David. They're angry, but they'll be fine." Richard's throat tightened. "Did she say anything about me?" "She asked if you were sorry." Eleanor turned then, meeting his eyes. "I told her I didn't know." He swallowed hard. "I am." "I'm sure you are," she said quietly. "You're sorry it happened this way." Her voice softened, but her stance didn't. For the first time in years, she looked steady, almost serene. There was no tremor, no need to perform composure. It wasn't the calm of someone suppressing pain. It was the calm of someone done carrying it. "Do you remember when you told me you married me because I made you better?" she asked suddenly. He nodded, hesitant. "Yes. I believed that for a long time," she said. "But last night I realized something. I didn't make you better, Richard. I made you comfortable." She brushed a rose petal from her sleeve. "And you mistook that for love." He looked at her, truly looked this time. The lines at the corners of her eyes, the way the morning light touched her face without softening it. "What are you going to do?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "Live, I think. Not as your wife, not as anyone's extension." Richard stepped closer. "You can't just walk away from 30 years. "I'm not walking away," she said. "I'm finally stepping towards something." The breeze lifted her hair. She looked lighter than he remembered, unburdened. "You humiliated me," he said again, but quieter now, almost uncertain. Eleanor's reply was level. "You were already humiliated. You just didn't know it yet." He blinked at a loss for words. For the first time, the power between them had shifted entirely, and not through anger, but through her stillness. After a moment, she walked past him toward the house. On the porch, she paused. "The lawyers will call you next week," she said without turning around. "I won't drag this out." Richard's voice broke. "Is there really nothing left to save?" She hesitated, just long enough for the question to land. Then she said, "You don't save what was never honest." Inside, she began packing while the house filled slowly with daylight. Photographs came off the walls one by one. Some she kept, some she didn't. The sound of drawers opening and closing echoed softly through the rooms. Later, when the taxi arrived, she didn't cry. She simply stood in the doorway, coat buttoned, suitcase by her side. Richard sat on the couch, unable to meet her eyes. "I don't hate you," she said finally. "That would take energy I'd rather use elsewhere." He nodded faintly, defeated. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere quiet," she said. "Somewhere I can hear myself think again." Her hand lingered on the doorknob. "Goodbye, Richard." And then she was gone. Outside, the sky had cleared completely. The rain had stopped. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the air against her skin without the weight of pretense pressing down. At the end of the driveway, she looked back only once. Not at the house, but at the idea of it. The shell of a life she had once believed in. Then she turned forward again. Inside, Richard sat motionless, staring at the half-empty champagne glass still on the table. The celebration he had once owned now existed only in the past tense. Eleanor, meanwhile, didn't look back again. The quiet she walked into wasn't empty. It was honest. Evening light filtered through the windows, gold giving way to blue. The house looked cleaner than usual. Too clean. No shoes by the door, no coat on the hook, no trace of Eleanor's quiet rhythm that once shaped the space. Only stillness, dense and absolute. Richard sat at the kitchen table, staring at the same glass from the night of the celebration. The bubbles were gone days ago, but he hadn't moved it. Something about it felt fitting, an echo that refused to fade. A newspaper lay folded beside him, the front page headline, "Executives Party Scandal Sparks Online Frenzy." There was no mention of names, but everyone who mattered already knew. His assistant had resigned that morning by email. His firm had requested a temporary leave to preserve company integrity. He hadn't answered either. The house ticked and settled as the evening cooled. Every sound, the creak of wood, the hum of the fridge, felt louder now. The silence no longer held peace. It held consequence. He tried calling Anna earlier, straight to voicemail. David hadn't replied to his messages. He couldn't blame them. They were with Eleanor, he was sure. She had always been the gravitational center. He had just believed the orbit was his. When the phone finally buzzed, it startled him. For a brief, shameful moment, he thought of Lydia, but the screen showed a message from David. "We're okay. Give Mom space. Give us all space. No accusations, just distance." Somehow that hurt worse. He leaned back, pressing his palms to his eyes until colors bloomed behind them. Images flashed. Eleanor at the microphone. The way her voice didn't tremble. The way the crowd went still. It hadn't been vengeance. It had been truth spoken aloud for the first time in decades. He'd spent most of his life shaping perception, crafting applause. And now, stripped of all that, he finally understood what she had meant about honesty. Outside, a soft wind stirred the garden. The roses Eleanor planted years ago were still there, bending under the weight of late blooms. He stepped out barefoot onto the patio, the air sharp against his skin. The grass was cold, grounding. He stood there, letting the quiet settle into his bones. He thought about calling her, not to argue, not to beg, just to hear her voice. But he didn't. He knew any words he found now would be too small to matter. Instead, he went back inside and began to move through the house. Slowly, deliberately, he opened drawers, closets, cabinets. He picked up photo frames one by one, really seeing them for the first time. In one, he was laughing, his arm around Eleanor, sunlight spilling over them. He studied his own expression, how proud he looked, how certain, how blind. He set the photo down carefully, face down. Then he sat in the den, the same place she had stood the night before she left. For the first time in his life, Richard didn't think about rebuilding, not about apologies or explanations or the version of himself he wanted the world to see. He simply sat with the wreckage, still, silent, aware. Hours passed like that. The house grew darker. The faint hum of city life outside seemed impossibly far away. When he finally rose, it wasn't with resolve but recognition, the kind that came too late to fix anything, but just in time to understand it. He took Eleanor's glass from the table, rinsed it, and placed it carefully in the cupboard beside the others. The motion was small, almost reverent. Then he switched off the lights and walked upstairs. Across town, Eleanor sat on a small balcony overlooking a quiet street. A modest rental, barely furnished. Just a table, a lamp, a few boxes still unopened. She was reading a book but hadn't turned a page in a while. The city moved gently below, anonymous and alive. Her phone buzzed with a message from Anna. "Dad's home. We're staying with you this weekend. Love you." Eleanor smiled faintly, typing back a simple, "I'll be here." She set the phone aside and leaned back in her chair, breathing in the night air. It felt lighter now, as if the weight she'd carried had finally lifted off her shoulders and drifted into the distance. She didn't hate Richard. Not anymore. He had been a chapter, a long, complicated one, but not the whole story. As the wind shifted, she closed her eyes. Somewhere inside the quiet, she found something she hadn't felt in years, her own rhythm. No audience, no pretense, just the steady pulse of being free. Back at the house, Richard lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the echo of her final words looping softly in his mind. "You don't save what was never honest." Outside, dawn began to edge the sky in pale silver. A new day, though neither of them would call it a beginning. It was something quieter, an acceptance. Two lives once tangled now unspooling, slowly, cleanly into separate light.